Good morning, dearest friends. Welcome to our daily Talmud Chabura.
What?
Studying one page, one line at a time. Today is the 20th of Elul, September 16th. It's an Erev Shabbos. We're joined today by so many our wonderful regulars and some very chashuva guests traveling for Simchas and otherwise joining us. So welcome to our visitors from Johannesburg. And welcome to the Nashes, or Mrs. Nash. Anyways, yesterday was an interesting day. We had the opportunity to sit with a mohel and probe the depths of the ritual, facets of the process that we may have not been super clear with. And Baruch Hashem, I don't know about you, I walked with a lot of clarity. But it is time to step back into the Talmud. And so we are currently studying Masechet Shabbat, chapter 19, Rabbi Eliezer de Mila. We are on page Kuf Lamed Daled 134. The general discussion, the gist of our Mishnah, was a discussion about bris. The Mishnah enumerates 4 steps, 4 stages that are essential either halachically or for medical purposes to the circumcision, and therefore they are done on Shabbos. Just to say the words, Mila, Priya, Mitzitza, and wound care. It is that final item, wound care, that we're actually discussing. Interestingly enough, in times past, maybe today as well, a pharmacist, a chemist, and a cook had a lot in common. Today, it's more knowledge of chemistry and the ability to fuse and combine different ingredients. But in the time of the Mishnah and the Gemara, many of the recipes, many of the ingredients overlapped. And so in the course of discussing items that can or may not be prepared or introduced into the wound care process, lead us to a side discussion on the matter of certain other food items on Shabbos. And so that's going to be our initial conversation today. I just want us to keep in mind how we got there. We're talking about Yontif because we were talking about mixing wine and oil on Yontif versus Shabbos, crushing spices on Yontif versus Shabbos. And so now we've taken a slight detour, as the Gemara does from time to time, introduces additional items, most likely reflecting the style of the original conversation, where there was an attempt to preserve vast amounts of Torah and halacha knowledge, and if a conversation about Shabbos, about bris on Shabbos, turned to bris on Yontif, and parenthetically there was a related topic about Yontif that was not so much about Shabbos, about bris, it's okay to be introduced, and that's what we're going to see here today. Be'ezer Hashem, let us share the screen, and again we'll wish a mazel tov to Beryl, to Rosalie, for the bris. It's a Montreal bris, correct?
It's Hashem Wednesday at Torah Center.
In a good Shah, and I'm not going to ask you to how do you call it, to stream for us the bris in real time, but maybe you'll report back. And the main thing is it should be in a good Shah, and it should be with Gezunt and Mazel and Nachas and all good brachas for everyone involved. And we should all only share Simchas. Now let's find the page.
Amen.
So here we go. All right, here we go. Tana Rabbanan. A text. Oh, did I miss it? No. Tana Rabbanan. Ein misanenin. Now we're going to talk about mustard. Ein misanenin nesachardol b'misanenes shaloi. On Yontif, one is not permitted to strain or sift mustard in a mustard strainer. The ein mimaskinois begachelas, nor may one sweeten it by applying heat, by applying it to a coal. Let's read Rashi. Ein misanenin nesachardol. Although the quoted text doesn't mention it, Rashi knows the context of the broader series of Braitot. So it's talking about on Yontif. Why can't you filter it in its own strainer? The Gemara in just a moment is going to explain. The mechsi keboirer, the appearance is an appearance of boirer. What is boirer? Filtering, sifting.
Separating it.
Shamash l'chasubin shalai, because as if you are disposing or setting it apart from the inedible facet.
So let me ask you a question. It says specifically from sanenet shelo and its own sifter. So does that mean that in a different sifter you can?
Possibly. Let's see the Gemara in a moment. Very possibly. I'm only punting because the Gemara is going to talk about it, but it's a good question. Apparently it was common that you put something very hot exposed to the garlic to release or whatever it exactly did to cook it to some extent. So this is the statement of the Chazal that when it comes to garlic on Yontif, you have some restrictions. You cannot filter it in its strainer and you cannot apply it to the coal. Abaya tells Rav Yosef, don't we have a text that seems very similar, but the halacha is different? Why is this any different than the Mishnah we learned that says one is permitted to strain an egg in a mustard filter, in a mustard strainer? So hold on, can you use the strainer or not, Rashi? What's the objective of running an egg through a strainer? The egg goes through it. It makes the egg look nicer. Maybe it beats it to an extent or breaks it up. I don't know exactly why you'd want to run an egg through a filter, but the word Rashi uses is
in case you just want to have the yolk. The yolk itself looks nice.
But is that what we're talking about? Are we talking about separating the yolk from the white?
That's what it seems to be, because if you put it in a strainer, the yolk will remain as long as you don't whip it up, and the albumin, that would strain through.
You'll see why I'm not comfortable with your shot, but that is definitely the most immediately reasonable interpretation.
Rabbi,
According to Rashi, I'm just saying that according to Rashi.
According to Rashi, it is not.
Well, it says to make it look better. So
does an egg look better absent its yolk?
Not absent, only the yolk.
Well, the yolk stays on top, and what falls through.
And usually, it's what you would strain through. Is many times you don't want. It depends what you want out of the egg.
Interesting.
Rabbi,
I don't think they're talking about a strainer like we know of a strainer, because it will never go through.
Well, they used
hold on. I want to tell you something. I think
a strainer used to be a gauze or any.
Could be cheesecloth.
I may have just committed a random act of amaratzis. I may have just committed a random act of amaratzis. Let's see if we.
Rabbi, can I ask a klutz kasha?
Go ahead.
Isn't it strange that this is what they're worried about? Of all the things you could and couldn't do, is this a major important issue, a common issue?
It doesn't matter if it's important. It matters if there's a halacha needs to be consistent, regardless of how.
Actually, from the uncommon issues, you can later learn for the common issue.
So let's indulge me for a moment. Let's see if we could uncover a random act of amaratzis. Let's see.
He goes to there and he gets everything.
Very nice. Hold on a second.
Is it, Rabbi?
Yes, doctor, go ahead.
This idea that there's something called a mustard strainer, and you could do an egg in a mustard strainer, but you can't do a mustard in a mustard strainer. Are there other strainers that are not called mustard strainers that strain things? Because why would we deal with a mustard strainer on an egg or its own? It suggests perhaps that all strainers were called mustard strainers. Perhaps. If not, what strainers perhaps you could do some of these acts on that were not mustard strainers.
So, Doctor, your question and this thought process is part of what makes me think that maybe we need to revisit what's happening over here. Maybe the reason why the egg is being put through the mustard strainer is not to improve the egg. Maybe there's something in common between an egg and mustard. Can anyone think of what there is in common between an egg and mustard?
It's color.
Color. So maybe I have to revisit, and that's why I called it a random act of amaratzis. I'm being a little harsh on myself, but maybe we need to reconsider why you might be dropping an egg through a mustard strainer. Maybe it's not because we want the egg to look nice. Maybe it's a natural additive. We're adding a color so that the mustard looks more mustardy. Maybe because natural mustard might not have such a yellow hue, a yellow color, and maybe the yolk. So we learn in a Mishnah, which I was looking for the citation here. It's later on in our Gemara. You know what? Let's pull it up also.
You can buy a mustard strainer from Amazon.
What?
They have mustard strainers from Amazon.
Okay, so could you tell us what a mustard strainer is all about, Reb Allen? Why would
I'm showing it to you. I'm showing it to you. I'm showing it to you.
No, but can you explain? I can't see, but could you explain to me why I would buy a mustard strainer?
I have no idea.
What do you put in?
Believe me, it's not to strain that very, very yellow pasty kind of thing we're talking about.
It's probably because when the mustard is the seed, when you grind it, it probably has big chunks in the strainer. You want to get the chunks out. So
Or maybe part of the mustard seed has less flavor.
when you grind anything, you get smaller and larger particles. And you often run it through a strainer to get the fine stuff out, and then often you might regrind the bigger pieces.
All right, let's see this Mishnah. Maybe Rashi will help us. I don't know for sure. This is a Mishnah not far off, Kuf Lamed Tes. So we'll be there in no time. It talks about different kinds of strainings that may or may not happen. V'noistim beitza b'misanenes shel chardal. So I think we're going to come into a machlokes of translators here. Noisnin beitza b'misanenes shel chardal. Let's read Rabbi Steinsaltz. When we place an egg in a mustard strainer to separate the yolk from the egg white. Does this defend me? Rabbi Steinsaltz is giving me a vindication. Look in Rashi. That there is already mustard in there. When it drips through, it helps the appearance of the mustard. Interesting. Dr. Stamler, can you help us out? What's the difference between chel mon?
The chelbon is the yellow part, and the chelmon is the albumin. So
somehow Rashi is saying,
but I'll tell you, but from what I just Googled it, and there's a whole thing about this issue of chardal and the egg. But at one point they said that it's really not borer because
it's our Gemara. Give us 1 minute.
Yeah, so because it's really not borer because you're not really separating solid from the good. They're both good. It's just that
let's see in a moment. I just wanted to show you that apparently there are different interpretations of what exactly the function of this egg filtering is, and it might, depending on the objective, might influence how we understand the Gemara. But let's go back to our Gemara. Folks, if I'm confusing you, Reb Errol apologized to our guest from Johannesburg. Tell him I hope he's not being
not to worry. Being part of the family, he comes confused.
All right, so let's see. A brisa.
Good concept.
The brisa says you cannot use a filter for mustard. Abaya says, hang on, I got a Mishnah in our Masechta that says you may pass an egg through a filter, a strainer. Rav Yosef says there's no comparison between the placing of an egg in a strainer and placing mustard in a strainer. What's the difference? Hasam loy mechzi kebayer. The egg does not have a bayer appearance. Hacha mechzi kebayer, but by the mustard, at best, it has a very strong bayer appearance. Let's look at Rashi. Why is an egg not bayer? Dr. Stamler mentioned something. I just want to see Rashi before we look at Rabbi Steinsaltz. Shekula yaitza derech hamasanenes. The whole egg ultimately falls through the cracks. And so there is no psoiles remainder. Nothing is held back in the strainer, because unfortunately for us, the science of egg, although it's thicker than water, is that it's all going to gloop through the strainer. Whereas mustard that is a solid, if it's too big a chunk or a piece, as Mark explained, it will stay through. And so which act looks like bayer? Not that it is bayer, isn't bayer, but which act looks like bayer? The act where something remains on top, or the act where everything falls through? And therefore, says Rav Yosef, how would you even think to compare an egg, which is practically a liquid, to a solid? A solid item in a solid strainer is going to be strained. It's going to look like bayer, and by an egg, not so. Now I want to see Rabbi Steinsaltz and see if he learns the Gemara the same way as Rashi. Rav Yosef says there's a distinction.
I thought we agreed, Rabbi, that the yolk stays on top when you put it through a strainer. Now you're saying it doesn't, basically.
Based on Rashi's reading, it does not stay on top. Or based on my reading of Rashi, it doesn't
Yeah,
stay.
then let me ask you my question on Rashi is then why put the egg in the strainer in the first place?
Right,
if it all
right,
goes
right.
Because maybe it breaks it up nicely. Maybe it ends up. Maybe I'm wrong. Based on the other Gemara, maybe the egg does come through. But based on our Rashi, it does not.
But Rabbi,
Normally, when you do an egg, the white's the more liquid.
Hold on, Rebero, go ahead.
I don't see that the problem is putting the egg in. I think you're going to have to do some action for it to strain.
That's what I said. That's what I'm suggesting. It doesn't come out. Doesn't come through the funnel.
When the mohel comes back, we should ask him about the egg in the strainer.
I'm not going to inquire why you think a mohel would be qualified to weigh in on this.
Just kidding. From now on, instead of Tishbi, Yavo Veitaret, it's going to be mohel Yavo Veitaret.
Right.
So I'll tell you this. I'm starting to believe that there is a shtickle machlokes here in exactly pshat. But Rashi, the way I'm reading it, it is entirely not falling through. Now let's look at Rabbi Steinsaltz, who I believe has a different take.
Rabbi, could we learn from the Hebrew that there is an action, because the word straining an egg in English would suggest to all of us doing whatever it's required, not just putting it there and walking away.
Well, but here we're not talking about necessarily actively straining. We're talking about placing it in a strainer, right? Or maybe not.
No, I'm looking at.
Oh, you're helping me out.
Steinsaltz.
All it says is
straining.
placing, which supports Dr. Stamler and Dr. Hammer's question. But based on my reading of Rashi, the yolk does come through. Let's read Rabbi Steinsaltz and then Dr.
Quick question for clarification. Point of information. Chardal is mustard.
Yes.
Okay. There's mustard seed and there's mustard paste, which comes from mustard seed. What are we talking about here?
I believe we're talking about mustard seed.
Well, the seeds are dry. Why?
I don't even know if the people of the Gemara had mustard paste.
Okay, so the seeds. What are you going to? They're dried little seeds. I'm not sure.
I think this mustard is kind of like a spice that you might pick up in the shuk.
Okay.
They pulverized mustard. Maybe the house, the chef, the husband or wife, maybe would pick up some mustard in the shuk, mix it with a little bit of mayo. I don't know. Okay, I don't know what they mix into it, but here I believe we're talking about a dry item, which was commonly filtered through a strainer of sorts.
Why would you be filtering it? To do what?
To remove probably the less desirable parts, the bigger.
There might be something other than mustard.
No, I don't know exactly about the nature of mustard,
No,
but I
it
suspect
depends.
there's like a
It
husk.
depends. You may be separating it,
Right.
sifting it to eliminate the color of the egg, the yellow. If you don't want the yellow part of the egg entering in, or the opposite, if you're separating because you want the yellow part for coloring the
Right. Correct. That's what the rabbi said in the beginning. that he thought.
I didn't
But it's not-
realize
but
that
it's
they
not-
had an egg white omelet already in those days.
So I just want to
But
share with you
it's not-
something.
But it's not pro-rare because it's not solid.
The Mefarshim
So
note,
Right.
the Mefarshim note that Rashi himself seems to be in contradiction with himself. Rashi here seems to have a contradiction between the way he interprets here that everything falls through and the way he interprets the Gemara that I brought to try to gain clarity, where he says that the egg white stays on top.
Rabbi, let me ask you a general question. In
Okay.
borer, is the act of borer the psolet from the good, or is it any separation of two items from one item? Even if if one of them is not.
I'll tell you,
garbage, not psolet.
one is permitted to remove good from bad, but
I'll be ready at about 11.
And good from good, you can
yeah, but in
remove.
a kli, in a keli, you're not allowed to do borer like that.
Uh-huh.
You still have to.
Hold on, we didn't read Rabbi Steinsaltz yet. Let's see if Rabbi Steinsaltz explains it differently. There is a distinction between the cases, says Rabbi Yosef, in the words of Rabbi Steinsaltz. By the egg, it doesn't appear like selecting, whereas by the mustard, it does. You know why? Straining an egg does not actually separate into its component parts. Straining mustard does. So Rabbi Steinsaltz brings a different pshat. Straining the egg
Would
doesn't
you
really
strain
separate.
the egg altogether?
I'm sorry?
If it doesn't separate, what's the reason for straining an egg?
To make it a little fluffy. I don't know. Maybe because you want to get the egg into the mustard. And the
But
best way
Rabbi-
to get the egg into the mustard is to pour it into the mustard. And there's a
You-
strainer
you-
on top of it.
Rabbi, you said you cannot be borer in a kli,
Correct.
even good from good. So if I have a basket with oranges and apples, does that mean I cannot remove an apple because I want an apple from
So
the?
I don't want to get too far down that direction. It's a good question, but it's gonna. The point is sometimes good from good is good from bad, depending on if you have one that you desire, one that you don't. Sometimes not. It is a little bit complex, but let's for now focus over here. I understand. Let's focus over here. We have a very interesting Gemara with what seems to be a very straightforward question and a straightforward answer. But in the nitty-gritty, it starts getting a little bit more complex because there are various ways to understand both the objective of filtering the egg and the exact circumstance of the filtering of the egg. And that's what makes this exciting.
Rabbi, is
Let's read twice.
Is it possible that you're straining the eggs the way we do today to see if they're kosher, to make sure, to look at it, which you don't have to do with mustard once you have
Very
it?
interesting. Very, very interesting. I don't believe so. Dr. Stamler, I think you're going to appreciate Tosfos. Tosfos, I think, is talking to you. So let's take a look really fast. Hacha, look at the words of the Gemara. Mechsi kebayer. The mustard looks like you're doing bayer. The egg doesn't look like bayer. Mechsi kebayer? Is it about appearance or is it about actually doing bayer? So Tosfos says, "Mil bayer lo hava." By the mustard, it's also not bayer. Shigam apsoilas roi lachila, because really you're sifting between two edible parts. It is unlike the filtering that we're going to read about next perek. The where there is an opinion that one would be chayiv. So we want to over here, Tosfos points out clearly that the purpose of this filtering, both mustard and egg, is not ultimately to separate an edible from an inedible. It's to accomplish some other function, maybe to disperse the egg nicely on the mustard. That was my original take. Was it? No, that was not my original. That was my second take. But it's what's born out of Rashi, because Rashi says that you're not actually separating the chelbon from the chelmon. They're both falling through. Whatever the case is, this concludes our study of the Gemara. But hold on. Let's take a fast glance in the Shulchan Aruch and see how they deal with this. If they link it correctly, let's see.
We'll be lucky not to finish with egg all over our faces.
We'd be lucky to have egg on our face, right?
That's why they call them deviled eggs. When you put the mustard on top of the egg, you gotta.
It'll mean we learned the Gemara well. There's egg on our face.
Actually, it's the chalmon is the yolk, and the chalbon is the
Right, chelbon is the white
So-
part, right? From
right.
Chetwin. Which is interesting because I tried
Actually,
to
the
say that
translator
the
calls
point
it
of
I
the
protein.
egg,
stand corrected then.
but it's also interesting because Dr. Stamler, I know what you translated based on context. It would make more sense that the yolk would be what you'd want to have on your mustard, not the white.
The truth is, I always get mixed up between the two of them.
So here's how we'll figure it out in the future. Chelbon has the word chalav, which is
Chalav,
white.
yeah.
But back to Menachem's point, I thought that Boine, things had to improve. If it doesn't improve, I thought it was never a problem.
Well, obviously here in our Gemara, we're not talking about a biblical prohibition. We're talking about a rabbinic prohibition because it's mechzi, because it has the appearance of a malacha. I shouldn't say obviously, but apparently.
This is a serious Indian. It's no yolk.
Bernie.
All right, let's take a look at the next Gemara. I think we'll have an easier time. Although I'm not sure if we want to have an easy time. It's fun to have a hard time. Here we go.
Some people like the eggs hard boiled.
So Reberol, instead of opening a can of worms, we're breaking a few eggs. All right. You got to break a few eggs if you want an omelet, right?
Exactly.
The aim
You have to walk on eggs sometimes.
I'm sorry.
You have to walk on eggs sometimes, especially if you're married.
In this Gemara, we don't walk on eggshells. It's a good question, by the way. On Yontif, you're allowed to do anything to cook, right?
Yep.
So why can't you filter the eggs? Let's see the next Gemara. Maybe we'll get an insight.
Why can't we presume this is an Indian only on Shabbos and not on Yontif?
It said in the beginning of the one.
I'm sorry.
Why can't we presume that this is only a question on Shabbos and not on Yontif?
Because our Gemara is explicitly talking about Yontif. So, by the way, I'm looking around. Our confusion is confirmed. There's two pirushim of what's going on with the egg. Either the egg goes through or the egg does not go through. If the egg doesn't go through, it's still not boyer because it's both edible as Rabbi Menachem proposed. And it also explains why consistently Rabbi Steinsaltz doesn't always choose Rashi if it's shver in the broader context. Rashi has his reasoning, but Rabbi Steinsaltz is not afraid to teach the Gemara not according to Rabbi Steinsaltz. Okay, let's learn the next segment. The A, you're not allowed to sweeten the mustard with coal. But elsewhere it says that you're allowed to sweeten the mustard with coal. Again, my understanding was that applying mustard to coal will cook it a bit and cause it to be a little less sharp. I hope I'm right. Lo kasha. It's not shver. It's not a contradiction. One source, the Brisa says you don't, and there's another Brisa that says you do. Kan begechel shel ataches. Kan begechel shel eitz. The nafkamina is, the difference is, what is the material from which the coal is made? Is it a metal coal, or is it a coal made of wood? Rashi. Begechel shel eitz asor. It's prohibited if you're applying it to wooden, char, coal, the shayach b'kiboy. By placing the mustard on the coal, you may unintentionally or inadvertently put out the fire, because it makes, how do you call it? Pechem. It makes ash or whatever you call it. But if you have a piece of metal that's really hot, it's not going to make. Give me a word. What's pechem?
Pecham is coal.
Coal.
Rabbi, I don't understand. I don't see heating or cooking mustard making it sweeter in any way at all. I don't know. Why would
Have
you
you ever
want to
tried?
sweeten it? Well, my mother always made mustard. All you do is add boiling water. I mean, she used to laugh at people who buy prepared mustard.
So she'd buy mustard seeds. She would boil it,
No, just put boiling water over it.
and then what do you do with it?
Probably in a sieve type of thing. But sweetened by heating, what?
Well, maybe boiling water also sweetens it, but probably in those days they wanted it as a powder, and so they couldn't add boiling water; or they would be more complicated. But you could add boiling. You could add fiery.
I would never use the word sweet to the mustard. That's for sure. Of all the adjectives you could
So
use.
I think, by the way, in Hebrew, sometimes mematkin could mean diffuse intensity, its sharpness.
That would make sense.
Dr. Stammer, do you agree? For
Now,
example, we talk about mituk,
means to sweeten something.
but
but
let's say
also,
mituk hamayim doesn't
I don't
literally mean the water
understand.
has sugar in it.
I don't understand how you can sweeten it with a gachelet. That's the other thing I don't understand.
The heat.
No, in the gachelet. Uh-huh. I thought it was
You're like
with the
toasting
actual,
it.
with the, I thought they meant the gachelet in the with the actual part of the coal, but I can't see that sweetening at all. So
So pechem will translate as char, and the gachelet will describe loosely as coal, but really it means the fiery item that's entirely heated up. When it's made of metal, there is no char. Wood becomes all charry. So
yeah, actually,
basically,
Steinsaltz also says sweeten it with coal.
right,
So
but what
I
does
don't
he mean? It's not like instead of sugar, put coal. But I imagine cooking it diffuses some of the sharpness. That's what I imagine. Let's read. In the case of metal, extinguishing the fire is not a doraita. By the wood, it would be a doraita. So therefore, you can toast or char your mustard seeds with a metal, but not with wooden coal. Rav Yosef challenges this. You're telling me that we restrict how you're allowed to toast or broil your mustard seeds. Well, I happen to know you're allowed to barbecue, you're allowed to roast a shtickle fleisch on coal. And of course, there's a chance that by putting the meat on the coal, it might put out a fire. So are you allowed to roast or barbecue food or not? Be consistent, ask Abaya. Answer here is no longer going to be about the technical facets of of barbecuing, but rather about if you have ample opportunity to do so before Yontif.
actually the only way,
Meat has limited shelf life. Not so with mustard. And more so. A steak that was grilled yesterday is not going to be sizzling and hot and juicy and delicious. And so your meat needs to be grilled freshly. Not so with mustard.
So
go ahead.
Rabbi,
it seems pretty normal today to grill on wood. Okay, number one, and number two, there are wood is being sold sometimes because of the alleged flavor that it imbues into what you are cooking on top.
Indeed, so and we're saying that you can cook your steak on any type of coal and any type of fire, and we're not worried about putting out fire.
By the way, when we discussed before the gachelet and the mustard and the coal, I recall that coal is broken down, can be used as a filtering system. for things. They
Filter
use
water,
even
right?
today. Even today, they use coal particles for filtering. So maybe that's what was meant. Maybe that's what was done.
So yeah, basically what we're saying here is, however, that we don't mind. You can put your steak on wood coal.
Right.
You put your steak on metal coal. You can cook your meat however you like. So the first question is, why are you tying our hands when it comes to how we grill or toast mustard seeds? It should be the same principle and more. Think about it. Mustard seed is less likely to put out fire. A steak with all of the juices is more likely to put out fire. And the answer is here, we don't. It's all about if you could have done it before Shabbos. Let's read Rashi. You could roast the meat even if it puts out the fire. Like you're not able to roast before Shabbos. To be yoima shvicha tvei, real time grilling or roasting is a lot better. But mustard could have done before Shabbos. So we're probably not talking. We are not talking about a biblical prohibition to grill mustard seeds. But if you could have done it before Shabbos, don't wait till the Shabbos. Be as prepared as possible. By the way, nothing really to do with our Gemara, but I googled mustard and egg, and apparently it's a thing. Mustard and egg go together in different ways. You have Amish mustard eggs and pickled eggs and all different kinds of relationships or recipes that entail mustard and egg, including maybe a deviled egg, as the doctor pointed out.
I know a couple of people who are good eggs.
Devils, you know a devil? Let's see something here.
We might learn from this that egg was a big part of the diet at that time.
Yeah. Well, the advantage of an egg is that you could eat it without killing your source of eggs.
Yeah.
It's
Also,
a pretty big deal.
Easier economically if you have a few chickens.
Yeah.
That's also why the life expectancy was low. Just
They ate
kidding.
raw eggs.
I don't know.
They didn't know about cholesterol then.
That was probably the least of their problems, but
Cholesterol wasn't invented yet.
I want to read this for you. This is the Mishnah Brura about mustard and wood. Mishum kiboy. You can't do it because you might put out the fire. This is for food. And on Yontif, you're allowed to do things for food. It could have been done yesterday. The asruhu midrabanan, and biblically it's permitted, but the rabbanan prohibited. Suppose it was impossible to do yesterday, it would be allowed to be done. Ideally, you don't want to do it at all. But the point here is, again, it's pretty close to what the Gemara says, but he adds that point. It's a rabbanan prohibition. So I wanted to share that with you. Let's see the continuation of this conversation. So the Gemara started by quoting a brisa that talks about mustard being filtered, and we contrasted that with egg that is allowed to be filtered, and we explained that one has the appearance of butter and one does not. We then asked, what is the difference between toasting mustard and toasting other items? We said simple. Mustard can be toasted and prepared prior to Shabbos. Omar Le'avai Le'Rav Yosef. So now the Gemara continues to talk about other food preparations on Shabbos. Mahu legabein. Are you allowed to make cheese? Are you allowed to curdle cheese? Rashi Givina. So I learned from my kids who like to do science projects that if you take milk and you introduce certain agents, it begins to curdle. So if you put lemon or vinegar, it begins to curdle, and in no time you'll have the very beginning of cheese. Are you allowed to do this on Shabbos? Anyone, Alan, have you ever made
Actually,
cheese?
this Yom Tov, I think. I don't think Shabbos.
I'm sorry, Mark.
It's just, they're saying, talking
I'm
about.
sorry,
Yom Tov.
Yontif. Yeah, the question is Yontif, right. So, Alan, have you ever made cheese?
I eat cheese. I don't make it.
You need to recruit someone from Wisconsin.
My uncle makes string cheese.
Is that Syrian string cheese?
Yes, the white one with the blocks. You peel it out. He makes that.
Yes. What's the name of the company?
Myers string cheese. He does it for the community. That's why he just makes it. He makes his own cheese.
Okay, don't ask him to come on the show yet.
No, he'll start cursing.
I'm kidding.
He's a funny man.
We're putting together everything for the bris, and after the cream cheese, we'll deal with the bagels, and we'll have everything.
Anyone know a bagel maker? All right, okay. I'm gonna buy that of Yosef. Ma'ala Gaben, are you allowed to make cheese? Oh, my lay, also, you're not allowed to make cheese on Yontif. Hold on, he says, my Shnami Lisha. You're allowed to knead dough on Yontif, even though you can't do it on Shabbos. It's a malacha. Well, making cheese, curdles, separating the edible from the inedible, that sounds like a malacha to me, but it's Sayrech Eichel Nefesh. You should be absolutely permitted to make cheese. Why, Abaya asked Rav Yosef, are you saying I can't make cheese?
Rabbi, am I to understand that you're allowed to knead dough more than you would need for what you're cooking for Yontif?
Kneading dough to eat dough on Yontif.
No, but could you make extra and for stuff that you're going to eat after Yontif? Doesn't sound right.
That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about making bread for Yontif. But I think your question, actually you're sharing a bias question. Hold on. You mean cheese for the Yontif bris I can't make, but I'm allowed to knead the dough for bagels? Something sounds wrong. They're both malachis, which should be waived because Sayrech Eichel Nefesh. Well, I suppose really the answer, let's see Rashi here. Shaloshin pas b'yomtiv v'inami l'lisha damya. Making cheese also has an appearance, especially in the original phases, has a similar composition and process and technique to making cheese, because I suppose first you introduce the agent, but then you collect it, and there's a certain way of kneading and combining and processing the cheese. Again, I'm sure Ellie's uncle would be able to share with us more specifically, but I believe that indeed in the original phases, there's a stretching and reintroducing, especially if you want to get that yummy Syrian stringy style of mozzarella. Do you call
And
it
there's
mozzarella?
water
What do you call it?
involved, and there's a whole thing. You have to do a whole process.
Right.
I see him do it.
So there's a lot of commonality between those two processes, based on
But
what Rashi said.
surely, Rabbi, if what you're doing will not produce edible cheese during Yontif, you shouldn't be allowed to start the
We're
process.
talking about making. You know how fast you can make fresh mozzarella? In 12 hours, you could have ask Ellie's uncle. 12 hours with diligent effort, you could have probably less. You could have fresh mozzarella. You're not going to get yourself an aged cheese, but you could have a
Or Lebanon. You can make Lebanon.
labna, or kefir. All right. Cheese can be done in advance. Dough, not so much. Rashi lo yafshar. The paschama ma'al yitvei hach after masmal. Fresh bread is a lot better than stale bread. But cheese, you make it today, you make it tomorrow, it's all the same. I don't know. You're going to ask me, I thought cheese needs to be fresh too. And if you don't have a refrigerator, I hear you. But in the time of the Gemara, that was not a concern. But there is a discussion. Well, Amir Nardoi, the folks of Nardoi are known for saying you gotta try our cheese. Givina Basyama Ma'alia. Our day-old cheese is fantastic. Ellie, call up your uncle and tell him you have a new slogan for his company. Givina Basyama Ma'alia. You can't get enough of my fresh cheese. It's amazing.
Okay.
The Gemara. So it sounds like we're saying that the fresher the cheese, the better. So the Gemara says, no, you misunderstood their marketing. Hachi kamri, afilu gvina basyama alya. Even if it's only a day old, it could be all right. It's good even at a day old, but that doesn't mean that 2 days and 3 days and 5 days is better. Or if you want to look at Rav Steinsaltz, cheese that aged longer is better. Even 1 day cheese is great, But you let it age a few days, then it's mamish enjoyable. Therefore, they did not permit curdling cheese on Yontif. It wasn't needed on Yontif. On the contrary, you did it before Yontif. It came out even better. So are you allowed to make cheese on Yontif? Doesn't seem so. All right, this concludes the segment of our Gemara that was the intersection or the common theme between bris and the kitchen. We have the ingredients used for wound care, and we have the ingredients that are used in the cooking, and we compared and contrasted where occasionally certain steps of the cooking process or the ingredient procuring process is allowed for bris and sometimes not allowed for bris. And conversely, we discussed a good bit about different steps of preparing originally the ingredients that are the same, but eventually other types of preparing a food. On Yontif, we talked about filtering mustard and egg. We talked about grilling mustard. We talked about the reason why you can make dough, but you cannot make cheese. So I don't know about you, but I learned a lot of new things that I didn't know.
Rabbi,
Yes, sir, Beryl.
I would have a general question. These are people that want to be sure.
So just wait. Can you give me 7 minutes?
I can give you 10 minutes, yes, go ahead. I'm stranded. You don't have no idea what I had people to help me.
What happened?
I'll wait for you.
Okay.
Rabbi, these are people that generally want to follow halacha. So why do we have a discussion about things that are very easily, if you're not sure, leave it alone?
Well, we're learning halacha. What
do
do you think?
That I want to make cheese on Yontif, or do it before, do it after, or do something else. I'm just trying to get
No. We want to know the halacha. We're not looking to take away things that are allowed to be done. And so our Gemara is preserving for us this scholarly conversation about the comparing and contrasting of different steps that may or may not be done on Yontif. So you may choose not to make bread on Yontif, to make it before Yontif. You may choose not to make cheese on Yontif. You might want to do it beforehand. But we need to know the halacha, and that's the effort that our Gemara is currently engaged in. So the Gemara is not looking to just simply take away things that you can do. There's enough things you can't do. So this is the halachic conversation, Dr. Hammer.
But you could cook with cheese on Yontif, correct?
You can cook with cheese. Yes, it's only about.
Okay, so if you're making macaroni and cheese for your kids,
for Shavuos,
and you're putting in different kinds of cheeses together, that in a sense produces something that isn't let's say Swiss or American cheese. It's a combination. Are you making cheese?
I don't believe that's the problem. No, we're talking about taking.
I don't think so. I think you're right. Just wanted to
be
make
allowed to do it, right? Yeah.
Just wanted to make sure.
I thought you were going to ask if you're on. I thought you were going to ask about making matzah pizza on Pesach on Yontif.
No, for sure. That
you could make matzah pizza, right?
Yeah, you can't ask her making matzah.
Even
pizza.
if it's 3 cheese matzah pizza.
Yeah.
It's practically a mitzvah, right?
Right. The people from Machu Picchu appreciate that every Jew knows that there's such a place.
All right, here's what we're gonna do. Let's take a taste. Let's experience the next Gemara. Ein oisem lachaluk. As you may recall.
Unfortunately, I better go. Shabbat Shalom. I gotta finish getting ready.
I'm sorry.
I have to get finished getting ready for Shabbos. It's less than an hour.
Well, Mark, thank you for joining us. We look forward to seeing you, Be'ezer Hashem, on Monday.
Shabbat Shalom.
Don't make any cheese until we know if it's okay.
Okay.
Shabbat Shalom, Mark.
Shabbat Shalom.
So we discussed in the Mishnah about how they had a uniquely fashioned bandage that was customized for the site of the bris. And they called it a chaluk. It was designed to match the specific healing needs and dimensions of the site of the bris. Amar Abaye said, Amrli Aim. Who's Aim? Anyone remember? It was his adoptive mother who cared for him.
The nurse.
Have had a medical background, a nurse.
Right.
Hi choluk dianuka. When I make a choluk, when I make these pouches for the youngsters, for the babies, lavche le sitre li iloi. Make sure to position it so that the strands are away from the wound site. Dilma midbik gir domine, lest a strand of the material of the fiber gets stuck in the site of the wound. The asilide krushivchan, God forbid, you can have a krushavcha, it could end up causing terrible problems to the male anatomy. Let's read Rabbi Steinsaltz. Place it on the upper side with the threads below, lest a thread from it stick to the place of the circumcision and cause the baby to have a severed urethra. Sounds like good advice. Don't let the strands, don't let the fibers get in the wounds. Oh, I think I said it wrong. Basically, turn it inside out so that the stitching are on the exterior. I think that might be pshat.
It's a strange hobby for a woman to produce these.
Not a hobby. She's a medical professional. One of her jobs is to prepare these. She probably had a special certification in wound care, and she produced for bris.
The startup of a major industry, Bernie.
No, I'm trying to figure out how she learned what to make and how to make it and how to shape
Other
it.
company,
She was an apprentice.
brisket. This was the brisket.
Jewish ingenuity. Come on.
Le'imra shebesfas piyah, the material that's on the inside, you should flip it over and go put it to the top. It shouldn't be near the flesh. Because the part of the womb, because otherwise the place of the cutting of the material is there. The yaitsim and agard that shekayrin tzitziyais, they're little strings, little fringes, little tzitziyais. The dilma madbika gard samine, maybe a little strand of it will become stuck b'maka. And when they want to come switch the bandage, God forbid you'll try to yank it off, and you could cause real harm to the site of the bris. And so be careful. Be very conscientious about the placement of the material.
I hope the moil that we use does not know what I'm studying, because I don't want to put pressure on him.
I think today gauze is designed to not cause such a problem.
Yeah.
But I don't know much about gauze and wound care, so maybe I'm wrong.
I'm going to watch a little closer this time.
We have what we sell is a non-stick gauze,
Right.
so
Also,
it
you
never
do not-
sticks to the wound.
Rebel, I feel terrible for the moil, but you know what? It's wonderful.
Alan, don't tell him if you see him. I don't know what moil MTC uses.
Tell him not to leave any tzitziot.
Just say,
He's
hey,
good.
moil. I just learned.
I want to
Rabbi
make. I want to make sure I see a bottle of Listerine.
No, he's good.
Something.
You won't see that.
You know the strange part, Menachem, that Listerine trademark is owned by the Vatican.
By the
Really?
Vatican?
Believe it or not, yeah.
Really?
At the NTC, they put vodka over it.
Oy.
I think this was the beginning of the Johnson and Johnson company.
Must be. It was Yankel. It was Yankel and Yankel.
Yeah.
I saw recently that Rolex is a not-for-profit. Did you see that?
No,
A lot of companies are not for profit these days.
not for taxable.
Or it's a
profit.
charity.
They didn't
That's-
plan it.
that's
They
belong-
didn't
that's
plan it that
charity.
way. They didn't plan it.
Rolex
It
is a
just turned out.
charity.
Yeah.
All right, interesting. Oh,
Yeah, but the
this-
CEO makes money either way.
They're doing all right. My dear friends, this concludes today's. There's for sure. There's definitely an angle. Anyways, this concludes today's Gemara. A little bit in the kitchen, a little bit about wound care, either buy Allen's non-stick gauze or make sure that you don't place the strand where loose strings are hanging near the wound site. And main thing is, everyone should have a wonderful Shabbos. If you're Ashkenazic, it's this Saturday night begins Slichas, and we start upping the ante and getting more into the New Year spirit. So we'll wish everyone a ksiva v'chasima toiva to be signed and sealed in the book of life. It should be a good year, a healthy year, a sweet year, a year of healing and health and prosperity and naches and gesund for everyone on this chabur and their households. And we should only have good news to share with one another.
Thanks.
Shabbos.
Amen.
Shabbos.
When do we continue the